I ran across an interesting question on social media the other day. What do you consider a mistake? And I thought it would be a great opportunity to discuss this because it doesn't get talked about enough. And it's a really interesting thing to dive into. So let's go down the rabbit hole and see what we can learn about mistakes. Aloha, my name is Brad Bordessa from liveukulele.com. If you like the video, like, subscribe, and please leave a comment, especially because I'd like to hear what you folks think about this subject. If I've got it right, if you have any personal experiences to share, please let's start a conversation. And also check the info box down below for my video courses and ebooks and other ways that we can stay in touch and continue the ukulele learning. Let's go. I think in order to understand mistakes, we need to frame it in two different ways. There are mistakes during practice and there are mistakes during performance. One of them is less desirable and one of them is just the way it is. So we'll start with practice. And everybody knows the saying that practice makes perfect. If you practice something enough, you'll become perfect at it, which you won't. But that's a whole nother point. There's no such thing as perfect music. There's a little less known saying that's kind of a variation on that is perfect practice makes perfect. And what that implies is that if you practice something well, as opposed to something just any old way, that the thing that you practice well will become perfect over time. But if you're practicing with mistakes included, just doing it a bunch the repetition doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to become good at that thing. You have to do it well in order to expect that you can continue doing it well. You set the building blocks of what you're doing, and if the bottom blocks are made out of balsa wood or whatever, by the time you're getting up to big concrete blocks on top, the whole thing's going to collapse. Same thing with practice. You have to practice well in order for those things to be ingrained in your mind and in your muscle memory correctly so that they're more valuable down the road. So if you're practicing and you are making a mistake, what you don't want to do is just keep repeating that and making the same mistake. There is a reason you're making mistakes, and that is the thing that you need to, as the practicer, dive into and figure out what that is. Why is that happening? If you push yourself enough, you can always create a mistake because your fingers and your mind will just not be able to keep up if you keep pushing the tempo faster and faster and faster. If I was to practice something along these lines, just a little fingering exercise thing. That is very much within the realm of something I can achieve. I can do that well. I can play it perfectly every single time without running into a mistake because I'm maxing out my physical and mental abilities. But if you were to bump that speed up and go faster and faster, then we might have a problem. And this is where a metronome comes in. If you can practice with a metronome, you can quantify this stuff and figure out where you start falling apart and work right at the edge of that so that you're pushing yourself. Because when you practice, you want to push yourself. If you're not working a little bit and feeling challenged, then the practice isn't doing as much good as it could be. You're not utilizing your time as efficiently as possible. You should always be kind of right at the ragged edge of practice. But as soon as you go over the edge and you begin making mistakes, then you're pushing too hard and you're going too fast. And that is also bad. So it's kind of a happy medium, and you can assess that with a metronome. So if I set it to 120, I could play every note per one note per click. So I go. And I have a idea of where that sits in my skill range. And if I take that and I go faster, maybe I could go twice as fast, probably. And so 120 becomes 220, and I would play eighth notes on top of this same thing. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... that kind of a thing. And that's still within the realm of my possibility. But if I push it more and I go faster, it's going to start getting harder and harder for me to actually achieve that. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... still within something I can kind of accomplish, but it's getting harder. What if I go another 20 dB faster to 170? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. I'm gonna go all the way to 200, and I'm pretty sure this is where the wheels is gonna fall off. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And that's fast, super fast. And that is well over my comfort level. So by using a metronome, you can tell where that is, and you can spend more time practicing right up to your comfort level. And from there, slowly and incrementally increase the speed. Instead of just guessing and going from, I can play it fine, this is boring, to going super fast and just running off the rails and making a lot of mistakes. You can, if you can play with the metronome, which you should work on trying to do if you're at a level where this is kind of engaging content, you should try and find that point where something is difficult and then push. Maybe it's two extra BPMs today and 2 extra BPMs tomorrow, and you just go a little bit. It's not enough to be super noticeable, but if you just click it up every so often so that you're going a little bit faster, you're going to eventually build that speed and that familiarity with whatever you're playing. But if you go over and you're practicing mistakes all the time, that is going to be what your muscle memory is getting used to. It's getting used to being sloppy, and that's bad. So when you're practicing mistakes, that's what's going to come out in your playing, because you're pushing yourself too hard, you're muddling through things, and the mistakes get baked into what your fingers know. So it's better to slow down and play something right over and over and over, as opposed to playing something a little bit faster and playing it wrong over and over and over. So that's where perfect practice makes perfect. That's where that saying comes from. So from a practice standpoint, I think of a mistake as, if we were to define it, a mistake is something that I don't intend, right? If I'm playing something and I'm practicing it, I want it to be just like I expect it to be, like I'm imagining it. When I imagine it, I don't imagine it going blah, 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 and falling apart. I imagine it being crispy and perfect and exactly how I want. And that's what I'm striving for. Anything that is not that is a mistake. So I'm going to slow down enough to do perfectly exactly what I want every single time. To me, that is the definition of a mistake in practice. But if we flip the coin and we start talking about performing, mistakes take on a very, very different meaning. And I think that this is where the conversation gets lost by a lot of folks and becomes less helpful for a lot of folks, because there's sort of kind of some bad advice that goes around. There's this assumption that all mistakes are bad when you are performing. And that is sort of true. Mistakes are bad when you're performing, when it becomes noticeable, when the music lurches or stops or otherwise is noticeable, hiccups in a way that is noticeable by the general public being the vast majority of people who don't play any music. They don't have any kind of sense of what the musicians are doing skill-wise that keep the music sounding nice. They just are there to enjoy the music. Folks like my family who are not musical, they just come to our gigs and, yeah, that was so great. Even if we were really struggling, they don't hear that. So if you can get by and play through mistakes so that most people don't notice, I don't think it's really a mistake. You are just serving the music, because when you get on stage and you play a song, there's no option to redo. If you're practicing something, you have the option of stopping and going back and doing it again, or stopping and slowing it down, and then doing it again. When you're on stage, there is no such option. You just have to send it, and it is what it is, and sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not so great. And I think that is a big part of the conversation that's kind of missing, because we assume that mistakes are always bad for everything. And mistakes are only bad if you let them knock you down, right? I think of it kind of like if you are on a busy street and you step up off the street onto the sidewalk and you catch your toe on the curb. It's only a problem if you fall down. But if you stumble and you catch yourself, not really that big of a deal. Maybe your ego's hurting a little bit because you look a little bit like a klutz, but you didn't actually fall down. You didn't skin up your hands or break your nose on the ground. It's okay. You saved the situation. And it's the same thing for mistakes in a live performance setting. If you make a flub, but you can keep the music upright and keep it going, it's not really a problem because it's going to keep going and the majority of people are not ever going to notice. And this is something that you build confidence with over time, for sure. As you do it more and more, you're going to learn to work through this stuff. But like with my band, we'll have flubs within the band. And we've practiced so much and we know each other so well that we hear it and we know immediately. All of us, we all usually will like smile. That's a big giveaway for musicians, is when they smile, they made a mistake. But no one else maybe noticed besides us because we're so far locked in. But we smile and we look at the other guys like, because we know that everybody does that eventually. And as long as it doesn't knock everybody else off track enough that it's a problem, which it very, very rarely does, it's fine. It's not a mistake. In my opinion, it's not a mistake because it's just a little hiccup in the music that changed where we went or changed where that musician went. Even if you bang a real squeaker chord and it's completely wrong, completely off, and very jarring and out of key, as long as it's on time, especially in a band situation, it's whatever. It's not that big of a deal. A lot of times we kind of put pressure on ourselves and think that these things are bigger deals than they actually are. Probably it would take a lot of wrong chords for somebody like my mom or my dad to notice, like, I think he's playing a wrong chord. I could be like out of key, like playing in the key of C and I'm playing a B, bang, bang, bang on top of the song. It would take a while before they would ever even notice that. So from that sense, I think that we have a lot more leeway than we give ourselves credit for. But from that perspective as well, if you're getting used to practicing perfectly and you avoid all mistakes, it can be kind of a funny transition to move from practice where you're not practicing mistakes to being on stage where if there is a mistake, which there will be eventually, even if you're the best player and you practice all the time, there will be a mistake eventually. You want to know how to deal with that and how to make your way through it. And that's where the concept of practice almost diverges a little bit from mistakes. So there's like intentional practice where you're intentionally building muscle memory and mental memory of doing something perfectly. No mistakes there, please. But then you get to like performance practice, which is a different style of practicing. Maybe you set up your microphone stand in your living room and you pretend you're playing on a big stage in front of a bunch of people. And you force yourself to play through the songs no matter what. And you get through them all the way without any mistakes. If you make a goober, you roll with it and you learn to roll with it. By doing it, you're learning how to adapt in the moment and to kind of be less attached to what it has to be and more open to, well, that happened, so I have to adjust, and now this is how it is. That's what it is. It's a performance. People get so uptight about performances having to be a certain way because they practice it a very specific way. But as soon as you get off and if your brain slips a little bit and you forget something, it's no longer going to be that very certain way. And if you're stuck on it being that very certain way, you're going to struggle a ton. You're probably going to stop the song, and that is bad. So in a sense, you have to almost lighten up and kind of let go of the reins a little bit when you get up on stage, and to accept that mistakes are really a part of performance. They're going to happen. The more you practice, the less they will happen, but they're going to happen. And when they do, you need to be comfortable with the idea of pivoting, whatever that might be to you. You'll adapt and grow and learn this as you perform more and more. But definitely a mindset of no mistakes ever allowed for performance as well is not helpful in my experience. It just sets unrealistic expectations. And then when something does go wrong, then you panic and you freak out because you have no plan B. You have no parachute and you're just going to hit the ground and stop the song. And that's the end of that. You're going to feel terrible about it. Whereas if you're a little bit more lenient about mistakes in performance, you can practice that as you're in the safety of your home, not performing, not actually performing, practicing the performance. You can kind of tippy-toe around and see how we can correct that. You're basically trying to get comfortable massaging a bad situation into something that's a little bit more favorable to the music that's happening. So I was thinking that I could play a song. I'll play The Jig Is Up off of the If Only album. It's a good example, and I haven't played it in a while, which is not true. This is take 2 of this video because my bit rate was wrong on the first one. I'm going to intentionally play this a little bit out of control so that you can kind of see what happens when you are running on the ragged edge and making a lot of mistakes, but hopefully still able to kind of, connect the dots and get to the end of the song somehow or another. Even if there's a bunch of goobers, it's still lovely music, hopefully. And this is going to be really exaggerated because I'm really going to kind of push myself. But we'll see what happens, and you can kind of come along for the ride. And I'll try and verbalize some of the mistakes I make, and you see if you notice them, and see if you think that it really affects the overall picture of the song. If you were a general audience member who didn't play music, would you notice this? Okay, so here goes. The jig is up. Forgot what's going on there? Really got lost there. Kind of trying to improvise. That was really rough. Really forgot what part of the song was there. Wrong chord too. Whoops, supposed to turn around there. Kind of trying to improvise a bit around this part. A little bit of variation I had to figure out how to come back to. So that's really rough, but I was intentionally trying to play it with a bunch of improvisations and kind of skipping to things that are not necessarily baked into my memory of how the song is supposed to go. If I was to play it completely kind of pristine, it would be a lot more simple and a lot less interesting for this example, but I was intentionally playing kind of out of control so that I could try and manufacture some mistakes that you would maybe notice, maybe not notice, and see how I have, with all of my practice and my performance, gotten to a point where I've gotten pretty comfortable of figuring out how to stumble my way. I've tripped on the curb. Now I'm going to stumble, add a bunch of steps to try and not fall on my face and to get through the musical moment. So hopefully that's a little bit interesting. But to me, that's what a lot of performance is. There are nights where nothing can possibly go in the right spot. The groove is off. Especially in the band context, it's a little bit more obvious. Like We're dragging, we're rushing, we can't find the happy medium pocket spot, everybody's playing the wrong chords. There are just nights like that where it just doesn't go super well. And then there are nights too where we don't work at all. It's just everything perfectly locks together, everybody plays amazing solos, and we just waltz right through it and have the time of our lives. And that's just part of being human and part of playing music. It's an organic expression that is not going to always be perfect. It's really nice when it is, and you practice so that it can be as good as possible most of the time. But that's not always going to be the case. There are going to be mistakes. Because the ukulele is so casual, a lot of the context of the conversation comes from practicing. Like I'm just a casual ukulele player, so I'm practicing all the time. I'm not necessarily outperforming. And so there's this impression that, oh, don't practice mistakes. You can't practice mistakes. And that doesn't necessarily translate to performance, because you don't get to practice when you're performing. That's what it all comes down to. It's like you have to roll with what happens. And if there is a mistake, if there is a goober, you have to do your best to get through it, to not fall down on your face, and to avoid the number one worst thing of a mistake, which is stopping the song. Almost anything is better than stopping the song. And this is much easier in a group context. But like playing solo, like what I just did, or if I'm playing like a small acoustic singer-songwriter Hawaiian set or something, the worst thing to do is to stop the song, because everybody, even the general public, has a built-in sense of time and sense of rhythm, and they're going to latch on to that rhythmic stuff a lot more than they are the notes. You could play the wrong chord, not too many people are going to notice. You could play the wrong note, might not sound quite like you'd expect. Maybe it's just jazz. Who knows? They don't know. But as soon as you stop, then it's obvious to everybody something has gone super wrong. So you'd avoid that at all costs. And what you can do to avoid that is basically anything. If I get lost, I totally forgot what was supposed to be there, like really. So I'm just gonna pedal on the chord until I get my wits about me. Maybe I forget what the picking is. I can just play the chords. And so that keeps the groove of the song going. Whereas if I was to say, oh no, and stop, I got to remember what I'm supposed to play, then everybody knows the cat's out of the bag. And that's the worst possible situation. So you stumble until you can try and get back on track. And even if you have to just go, what the heck am I supposed to play? Oh, right. Whatever you got to do something, do anything to avoid completely stopping the song. That's the number one takeaway. So hopefully that is interesting. Like I said, I did do an earlier version of this, but I updated OBS and the settings were all reverted for the bitrate, and it looked like I was on a Zoom call, which is not what I'm going for. And my earlier presentation had a lot of good off-the-cuff ideas. But hopefully this gets the point across. There's practice and mistakes. There's performance and mistakes. And in the middle, the two shall meet, where you practice performing, mistakes included, so that you learn to weave your way through some sort of loss of control of your fingers. Then you know how to get out of it. You can practice faking your way through a stumbled section to get on to the next bit of the song and do what you can. Or if you forget words, hum something. Right? That's where I usually goof up, is I forget the words to songs, especially Hawaiian songs. And if that happens, you don't stop and go, I wonder what the words are, or let me Google that for you and look it up. Like, you've already started the song. You have to keep going with what's there. So what you want to do is you hum, or you take an instrumental break, or you just keep playing the chords, and most people are not going to notice. If it's a really iconic song, another reason to not play super iconic covers, then they might realize, like, oh, like Rocket Man, missed the second verse of Rocket Man. What's up with that? It is what it is. It is what it is, and you have to adapt to that, and you have to get used to adapting to that. And it's a beautiful thing, because a lot of times the mistakes that we think of as mistakes, they're actually alternate windows on possibilities in the music that you maybe wouldn't have thought. We've done things like started songs, like our drummer Nick, I remember he started Love Song by The Cure. That's a cover that we do with Kingside. He started that song with a swing feel and committed to that and not going to stop the song. So we're like, okay, we'll play it with a swing feel. We've never done this before, but we figured it out. And by the end, we realized this is really cool, actually. Maybe we should play it like this all the time. And we never would have ever would have crossed our radars if that mistake didn't happen. So you just have to roll with it and see where you end up and realize that music is not a static thing. Even if you're a classically trained player reading from the page, like it's static because that's what's supposed to happen, but reality is something different, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So take that as you will, go forth, perform, and don't fear the mistake so much. Learn to work with it because it's going to happen. It's just a part of music and a part of being human. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Have you had any mistakes that turned into something different or any other kind of contrast to what I'm sharing here? I would love to hear it. Please post those comments up and let's get a conversation started. I'll catch you in the next video. Aloha.